Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ken Hoffman. I am the owner of the gallery. One of the artists that we've shown, the only one that I actually knew in person before we according to Wikipedia, Impressionism, which is 19th century movement started in France.
Can you talk a little louder?
A little louder. I have that problem too. Impressionism started in France in the 19th century. Some of the characteristics of Impressionism, according to Wikipedia, include the accurate depiction of light and its changing qualities, often accentuating the effects of the passage of time. Also includes the depiction of ordinary subject matter, unusual visual angles, and the inclusion of movement as a crucial element of human perception. And why am I reading this to you? Because I think Tamara's work, to me, is a depiction of today's version of Impressionism. To me, that's what it was. Tamara this is a photographic interpretation of today's Impressionism. It includes many of the qualities that I just mentioned. I'm very proud to have it exhibit. Tamara does a beautiful job of communicating her ideas through her art. She's a master of that. She is a talented artist. But I'll have to say one more thing that I include as one of the necessary things before we bring an artist into this gallery. They've got to be nice people. I don't care if it's Picasso, and if it's another person that is not a person I enjoy being with, I'm not going to get on these walls. So you meet the qualities of all of my comments. I also want to, before we go any further, before you start talking, and you can introduce your interviewer, I want to introduce Christy Headley, our gallery manager, and Ian Anderson, her assistant. And without these two people, this thing couldn't exist. So I'm just very grateful for both. Great. So thank you. Turn it over to you, Tamara, and you may introduce your interviewer.
Sure, I just want to say that I'm also very grateful and happy to be here to have my work on this wall. I love the space. And the niceness goes both ways. You all have been absolutely wonderful to work with. So thank you. And thank you all for coming. This is Mosche Quinn. He is one of my first photography teachers at Brookhill College. And I was his first student, right? Graduated from SFAI. Probably shortly before you started teaching. And that was in 2007. So I took quite a few black and white darkroom classes with Mosche, and people say his stuff, and he did, but I'm very grateful for all the knowledge that he transferred to me, and I don't think my photography would be what it is today without him, so thank you. And it's particularly meaningful to have you here today and having this talk with you.
Well, thank you. That's really, really nice introduction. I want to take a check with you guys to see if it would be okay if we were to speak without our masks. Would anyone be uncomfortable with that?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
And that could help with audibility. Oh, wow, suddenly, much better audibility. So thank you. So yeah, so just want to respond to something you said, which is really nice, you know, in terms of, the time, the time and like the history that's there. So thank you. So speaking of history and sort of the beginnings of things, what was it that drew you to photography to begin?
I never thought of myself as somebody who would do photography. I think I was always attracted to photography as an art form, but the technical side of it was always very intimidating to me, particularly because it was pre-digital. But I think since I was a kid, I always had those moments when something would stop me in my tracks, like in the street or in the park, just everyday life. And there was this feeling of some portal opening, but I had no special feeling but I had no way of capturing it and sharing it with people. And years later, when I overcame my fear of technology and actually took black and white class, I realized that photography was the medium that was allowing me to express those moments and share it with people.
So would you mind saying a little bit more about those moments? I'm really interested in this. Like you would be stopped in your tracks. It was a visual experience.
Definitely, yeah. It was
emotional.
Exactly.
So can you say a little bit more about
Well,
that?
it was always a visual experience, but it spoke to me emotionally, and it didn't have to be anything, I guess, necessarily beautiful. It could be, but now I'm thinking of it. Maybe it was the light, how the light was hitting the surface or something. So yeah, so on some level, I guess it is beauty, but it wasn't superficial. Well, it's a pretty flower. I want to take a picture of it. It was deeper than that, but it's really hard to put into words still.
Yeah. Well, it has been thinking about some things that we'll talk about more with regard to this word, but to unpack that a little bit further, I wonder if there was something of the ephemeral or transitoriness, a passing moment. These moments that you would think of, were they usually sort of like passing glimpses of things?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
if so, how was that important for those moments?
Well, I think probably everybody in the audience know that the same place that maybe you go to regularly, it might look different on a different day, right? So I think that those moments was particularly precious because it wouldn't necessarily open, that portal wouldn't necessarily open the next time I'm there. It was a kind of a singular experience. So, and I'm sorry if it sounds too out there, esoteric, but I think, yes, those were singular moments, and that's why I think the desire to capture them was so strong, because they couldn't be repeated brought back.
Okay, great. And so it sounds like with photography, what you're saying is that photography gave you some instrument or a vehicle for capturing and expressing something of those moments and having a record of it.
Exactly, and sharing it.
Inviting other people into that same moment.
Exactly, yeah. And maybe they probably feel something completely different from what I felt, but as long as they feel something, that's what matters.
Yeah, okay, well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And when was it you started, was it that shortly before I met you, right?
It was shortly before, yes, 2005. I took my first being that. I don't know if people know him, but he's pretty well known in the area these days. He was my first, I think it was his only class. He taught at Fulton College. I took a class there. Then I moved to Australia for a year, and I took a lot of photography classes there. Once I got back here, I was in your class.
So I think what we just talked about right now will connect to this next question. We're already talking about feelings, feelings, and not just feelings, but something of that quiet inner state, that we have, like when we're engaging with making art or thinking about art. So when we think about this series right here, how did you feel, and what were you looking for as you were working on this project?
It was very immersive, that experience, because I was actually standing in the water most of the time. So I had my rubber boots, and I even got waders, but with the droughts, haven't got much use. They haven't. But it was mostly like a meditation, getting lost in my senses, feeling. I have a strong attraction and affinity with water. So I think it's just being there in the moment and getting in the zone. And all of the senses were involved, the hearing, the like touch, because the sensuality of the slow flowing stream, and the sounds of I photographed it at Gazo's Creek. I don't know if it's along Highway 1, then close to Año Nuevo, but if you go inland, there is a road called Gazo's Creek, and Gazo's Creek is right there. So I think it was a meditative experience for me being there.
And on those details, I think this is helpful for people to hear. Like, could you say a little bit more about like just the simple facts of like where you were, what drew you to that area to begin with? Like those kinds of details for like this project.
Other photographer friends drew me. I knew a couple of people who photographed there, but they always photographed the trees because the trees there are quite spectacular. Lots of redwood trees, and it has different areas. Some areas are dark and shady and kind of ominous almost, and others are full of sun and birds singing. And of course, different seasons bring out very different emotions there. But I'm always drawn, when I took your classes, I was photographing the ocean, so I'm always drawn to the water. And when I see the water, that's where I go. So, and the water you have to go down. So my friend was on that, like a first floor, meaning the road and the trees, but I was kind of always down there. So, yeah, so I haven't photographed the trees there much, some, but it's the water that was the main attraction to me.
Yeah, and in a prior conversation, we were looking at this. You did talk about the sort of the low level of lighting that you were experiencing. Could you say a little bit more about that? And how you were feeling that, and how you approached that photographing?
Yeah, I think the border when the night leaves and very early morning or the end of the day, I think those are this kind of transitory states that are particularly filled with emotion for me. So when I started photographing, I was photographing very late in the afternoon, and the place gets dark much quicker than other areas because it's so full of trees. And then early mornings as well. They had especially emotive quality for me that I wanted to capture the transience that we keep talking about. It was there I could feel it strongly at those times of the day.
Yeah, something that occurs to me about that time of day, like if it's dawn or dusk or close to those times, the light shifts a lot very quickly.
Yeah.
So every moment, like 5 seconds later, sometimes it's different.
Yeah.
And so maybe that was important, like that other element of that time of day, like the quickly changing light felt important too.
Yeah, I think it again brings us back to that evanescence, right? That transit kind of you're trying to capture a moment, but the time doesn't stop, right? And water is particularly good at showing you that, because like the expression was Heraclitus, you cannot stop twice in the same river, right? And how it's like, even if I have my camera shooting every second, the picture will be completely different. So that transience, how fast it changes, and also the light's changing quickly, it just makes you more fully aware of, again, all your senses are heightened. To me, I think that's why it results in the images.
Yeah, well, I love that. I love that you bring Heraclitus into this. I'm really bad at like telling jokes or like quoting things, but it's like what he said was something along the lines of, you can never cross the same river twice.
Right.
Because the river's different, and also you're different each time in the process. And so that notion of, things are changing all the time, the only constant is change.
Right.
Life, and our experience of life is always in flux. And thinking of Heraclitus, I love what you mentioned that, because now it's like I'm thinking about this work, and also I'm imagining you in the river. Like you're wearing your gaiters, right? You're in the river. You were intimately connected physically to the river, creek, creek bed or whatever. And you're in it, and you're walking through it, and you're exploring it visually. And with this notion of change and ephemera, Heraclitus just seems great. I'm so happy that you mentioned that. It actually like opens up a lot.
There was another quote that I thought of quite often. I don't remember the author, but there's this wonderful book called Wabi Sabi for Artists. And it's kind of a simplified version, I guess, of Wabi Sabi and applied to art. And it says there that the closer things get to non-existence, the more exquisite and evocative they become. So I think, again, talking about the transience of water and the time of play, we see it quite clearly. You want to hold on to it, right? But
Yeah, it slips away. It's
Slips
always
away.
just slipping away. So speaking of that, I think that's a good segue to materials and processes. Could you sketch, like a summary of like what are the like the physical materials and like what are the processes that you engage in to produce this work?
Sure.
Things that would be interesting
Sure.
to hear about. Like your unique approach.
show and tell. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think when that quote that the closer things get to non-existence, I think that images printed on this paper, I think the images express this idea even more. And I made the paper, which was an experience also playing with water, right? Being physically engaged with water. So I brought a couple of show and tells. So this was the Sugeta, Japanese paper. Sugeta, Japanese. Well, you would pronounce it better since you live in Japan and speak Japanese. So this is the little one. They come in all sizes, but I was working in my kitchen, so this was the one that made most sense. And this is the device, and then this is the pulp. It's a kozo pulp, which is inner bark of mulberry bushes. So I would put this fiber in the water, and you add neri, which is like a gel substance made out of a plant, and I would play and do this many times, and then eventually a sheet would form, and I would take this out, and I would take this out and flop it on a surface and separate it from it. Still has some pulp on it. So printed on this paper, the images look quite different compared to how we would print on regular digital paper designed for digital printers. Even though these are printed digitally, but I think they look a lot more painterly and lower contrast, and like you cannot see every little element of them. So I think for me, this is the sheet, blank sheet.
How do you print it?
Sorry?
How do you print on it?
So I put it through a digital printer, but I use backing sheet, which is larger. I use a temporary adhesive, and I started printing for this exhibit. I actually started ironing to make sure that the paper is flat, and putting it through the printer. Very high failure rate.
What kinds of failures do you have?
Well, alignment, because I wanted the images to bleed, and I wanted to keep all of these stages intact. I didn't want to modify the sheet of paper itself. It even has to get the lines. You're welcome to touch it later.
Inkjet printer?
Inkjet printer. Well, actually, no. I guess it is inkjet. Yeah, photography printer, Epson 3880 printer. So, and also one other thing that we haven't, I guess, touched upon. I had to print to make the image a little bit larger than the sheet because I didn't want any borders, any white space. So there was a little bit of information, visual information that would get lost, and it took me 3 years to accept it. I was so frustrated. But then I realized, we're talking about the transience and not being able to see it all, capture it all. So maybe it's part of that I need to let go of whatever is not there, because hopefully there is enough there for people to feel whatever I felt. So
How long did it take to make one sheet of paper?
it's not long; it's a few minutes. Yeah, it depends on the density, how many fibers you have, and how much fiber you have in the water. It depends on, yeah, probably there's several different factors, but a few minutes, and the tricky part is separating it from these. Yes, all in one piece and have consistency. I have some failed examples too, which can be fun, but it would be tricky to print on. So
when you say failure rate, what percentage of attempts don't work out?
well, it depends on how much out of practice I am. And also if I'm having a bad day or a good day, or so many, how the printer is behaving. But I did waste quite a few sheets of paper, which is sad because they're so precious and unique. So I was afraid I would run out, but I didn't run out for this experience. So.
What's the material that you start with for the pulp?
It's this.
And where is it coming from? You ordered that
From Japan. Yeah. And there is a Hiromi paper store in Southern California, but they have some. Yes, they're archival. But because the paper doesn't have sizing, you get this lower contrast and muted colors. The colors are a lot brighter on just digital paper.
Could you have bought a similar paper from Hiromi?
Probably. But it wouldn't be as special, I think, to me. It's better paper. It would be better paper.
Would you mind saying a little bit more about that? The importance of making the paper yourself.
Well, it's not like I make paper for all of my series, but it's just I think the circumstances came together, and my mentor introduced me to paper making about the same time, and he showed me one of his images printed on the sheet of paper that I made, and there was no going back. As time-consuming as it was, there was no other choice really for this series.
I know there's a Q&A at the end, but this is a pretty interesting part. We're going to move on in a moment from the materials and processes. So are there any other clarification questions that you feel it's take paper to dry?
It also depends on, it's not long, maybe a couple of hours, but it also depends on the conditions and temperature, faster in the summer.
Did you experiment with other types of printers besides inkjet?
No.
What's the resolution of the inkjet printer that you're using?
I don't know about the print resolution. The images are, what are 25 gig Mark II Canon.
So you scan the images on the file that you then printed?
No, they're digital files.
It's a digital camera.
It's a digital camera. If the capture is digital, then I make the paper, but the printing is digital again. Yeah. So.
Not any color correction at all?
Very little. Sometimes I had to adjust images for this particular paper. I think every paper would require some adjustments, but they're mostly related to contrast.
Well, and I appreciate.
Yeah. So, Tamara, if the images change on this paper, the same colors, the way it prints, did you purposely not want to compensate, like in Photoshop, to make it be what it is you were seeing?
I think that's what I like about this paper, that additional transformation that happens, which makes them a little bit more evanescent, but poetic.
Surprise.
So,
You're letting go of some control.
Yes.
On purpose.
And then what is the material that little wood thing is? What kind of wood is that?
It's supposed to be wood, but I think this is plastic.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Already-
And this is a bamboo mat, and would probably use some placemats. But the true ones are, or the larger ones, Japanese authentic ones, are wood and quite expensive.
Would it be okay to background a little piece of the Kozo pulp?
Sure. It's like,
What does that mean?
It's dry. I expect it to be moisture, but
Okay.
it's probably going to make a bit of a.
So it really dries it out. Huh? Yeah, sure. Is this a good one to pass around then?
Yeah.
Can you show us?
Okay.
You said you had some, right?
I don't know if they're here.
And it's Christy, is 5:40 the mark for Q&A or 5:45? Or is it 5:50?
55. 55.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I think they're beautiful, but they are not made for, I mean, you couldn't print on.
Because they're just too thin.
Yeah.
Yeah, too thin.
Oh, it's like a tissue paper.
Great, I asked.
But they're wonderful for other purposes, yes.
Do you have a failed print?
Well, not on the wall. Yes, I've done some eco printing on them and I've made little books out of them. So, yeah, they have their uses. That's why I'm keeping them. But
So we have too thin, which makes sense for this work. Can there be too thick? Where you would uncut redux?
yes, yeah, the cardboard kind of, yeah.
And that can happen with
it wouldn't
this,
have the
this
same.
process. Sometimes that happens.
Yeah, I think I'm more on the thin side than the thick side, but yes, you can definitely can happen. Yeah. And for for some images would be great, but for these ones I didn't want to go too thick because that's not what they're about.
Probably wouldn't look with the printer either, yeah.
Yeah. Particularly since I'm already using the backing sheet, I go to wide, very wide gap. Yeah, platinum. Yeah.
Have you tried other?
Yes, I think I played with a background paper, but didn't like the feel of it very much. I've made some cotton paper, and that also didn't. It has shorter fibers, so it feels different. You can't go quite as thin with it.
When you mix this, can you add things to it? Maybe stuff you brought from the creek, throw it in there.
Yeah, probably. I haven't tried that. Yeah, but that's a good idea. Yeah.
So to switch gears a little bit, when you're in the creek, what did you find yourself looking for most? And what were you chasing? What were you pursuing?
I think the interest for me of being there was that you have what's above the water, right? You have elements that interact with the surface of the water, and then you have the elements that are above the water being reflected in the water. So I think every day was different, and I had some images which are not part of the series, but we talked about it, that reflectancy was so strong that I couldn't see beneath, but I could only see what was reflecting in the water, and they were very monochromatic, and they looked almost like ink, like brush drawings. So, but I think the translucency of the water, the transparency, and how it transforms what lies underneath, was very interesting. Also, the interaction of you have like 3 different layers of imagery, right? That's what makes these images complex. And that's why I call them watermarks, because they are certain elements become like watermarks on the paper. And the elements, you can bring it up, but maybe I'll mention it, that the surface of the water is a little bit like a metaphor for skin for me, and the piercing, the interaction of all the branches and twigs that happens. It was also just interesting to see in the tension surface and which forms it creates, and like if the leaf is sticking out a little bit, like one of these images here. So
Is it shallow?
it's pretty shallow.
So you're seeing
Yeah,
what's going down?
yeah.
And it's clear?
Yeah, and that's another interesting thing, because I am interfering with the imagery that I'm creating because I'm making I'm disturbing the piece. And the striders, the water striders, the insects, they also start moving when you are making movement, right? But they create wonderful visual effects on the surface. So no complaints there. The rain also, which creates circles, which I love. So yeah, a lot going on.
How many times did you go back to this location?
Oh, I think it has been in total probably 6 years.
What rain is that?
I know, a long time ago. But a couple of images here were taken in the rain.
How many times have you dropped the camera in the water?
I fell in the water, but I saved my camera.
Without fortunately.
Yeah, but you can get wet. No, no drown, but yeah.
Did you do any time lapse photography? How quick was your image capture?
Well, I am on, it's not just me in the water, it's also the tripod in the water, which also disturbs a lot around it. The reason I did take the tripod because I wanted the flow, I wanted to capture the motion of the water. But they're not, I couldn't tell you what was my longest exposure, but they're not very long.
It's not instantaneous, there's a little bit of time passed.
Yeah, but the water moves so fast. The water moves already, so you don't have to have a long exposure to capture it.
And is it all 35 millimeter?
It is
It's a
a
digital
digital
camera,
camera,
so-
but yeah, it is the ratio as far as ratio.
It's full frame. Full frame.
Yeah, full frame.
Digital
Full frame.
sensor. How about intimacy? Like we talked a little bit earlier about the size of the area that you were like really interested in looking at closely. Can you tell a little bit about that? Like with these photographs on the wall, like what's the maximum real, width and height of the image, like maximum?
Yes.
And what's the minimum of all these? Like how close do you get at like a small view on?
Well, the length was 250 millimeter focal length, so I don't know, from probably this area to this area, not very big. It's very busy there with all of the elements in the water, above the water, so I guess I took an easy way out of isolating an element, because if you try to include a lot, you don't know what you're looking at. When you are there, it's different because you are immersed in it, and it's gorgeous, but visually on a photograph, I've seen lots of photographs of the place, and it just gets too busy.
Yeah, that's actually really intriguing to me from what you said earlier. This fact that you're in a context where you say like it's very busy, there's a lot of clutter, and it sounds to me like you were really intrigued by like finding little small snatches or little small pockets of intimacy, simplicity. Can you talk a little bit more about that, like how you were like?
Yeah, I think that was the like that heightened awareness, right? It was only possible by focusing on a small part of it, like watching a particular leaf, doing the little dance going down the stream. It would just be too overwhelming. Yeah, it would be like the image in the middle. Yeah, it was like a little dance happening. So I think that's why. Otherwise, I would be like.
Did you print these over a long period of time?
I printed at least one or two of them, and all of them, but one or two copies. I printed a pretty short period of time once I had all my paper made. But for this exhibit, I printed additional. So
Over what time period were the images taken?
probably 3-4 years.
Did you have a vision of what you were going to do with those images?
Not when I first shot them. No, the paper really gave it a clear direction, but there are a couple of other directions where it might go, like ink brush drawings, but I was talking about monochromatic images, but I haven't really pursued.
And why was it that you kept returning to this creek instead of like going to a number of different creeks and ascending cruise?
I tried other creeks. They just didn't speak to me the same way.
Can you say like what was it about this creek? What did you get from it?
I
What
don't
did
know,
you
this
think about
place
it?
is just very special. It's hard to explain, but I think you're like a teacher now.
Give me more. Come on.
Yeah, I don't know. It has a very special atmosphere. And maybe it also is because I've been going there for so long. It became so much more special. Like my mentor, who also shoots there, likes to say that the place you deserve now the right, and the place reveals itself to you in a certain way that it wouldn't reveal to somebody like a stranger who would just come once and leave and never come back. So you develop, again, using his words, a relationship with a place. So yeah, I think that maybe that it's the creek I know.
So you may not have a tangible answer for this, but like speaking of the time, like the time-based quality of this, you said it was 3 to 4 years? With
This guy's problem.
with this creek, this one area. I mean, was there a certain spot in the creek where you sort of up and down the creek all the
There
time?
are certain spots. There are only certain spots where you can go down to the water, get in the water. So there are a lot of repeat visits to the same spots. So yeah, maybe 4 or 5 different spots and areas, but there are also different areas around that very spot.
So given the time-based, nature of the project, I think it's very fascinating. Returning to the same location again and again over a 3-year period or so.
Longer than that, yeah.
Were there things that you felt, and you may not have a tangible answer to this, which is fine, but I'm curious, do you feel like there was something that was revealed to you near the end of that time that couldn't have happened?
Yeah,
Like
definitely.
in the first year, and if so, could you talk?
Yeah, I think the first couple of visits, they were a little bit more superficial, the images, something that anybody would see and capture. But I think when you get to know the place, when you observe it in different weather, different seasons, different times of day, it definitely, you see a lot more than you would have seen otherwise. So I don't know if it was the whole year. Maybe I had some lucky shots in the first year. I couldn't really tell you, but definitely the longer I was there, I think the deeper the relationship.
Are you still going?
I haven't been for a while. The fires, when the fires happened, I stopped going. I went a couple of times after the fires, and it wasn't the water that was attracting me after the fires. It was mostly the trees, and with COVID, and it's not a place where I feel comfortable on my own because it's so isolated. So yeah, COVID also contributed to
I
it.
had a similar experience, and I finally decided to make a book. The book allowed me not to have to go back there anymore. It was the end of the project. And that was very satisfying.
Yeah, and
to
this
do that.
for me feels like completion. Yeah, completion of the. I'm not saying I'll never go back.
Right.
Just being there feels so wonderful. But and maybe different kind of imagery will come out next time I go. But it could also be endless, right? So it's nice to have something like this.
This is a very brief question before we move on to another topic, but with this whole series, thinking of the span of time that you were there, is it a pretty even distribution over that span of time, or is it more in the latter half of it, or?
Couldn't tell you. No, don't know. I could tell you which images sometimes were close to each other. Even some locations I remember, like this iridescent, like I know exactly where it's taken. Yes, and, the 2 upper ones might have been taken on the same day or at least the same spot. So, but other than that, no. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's a question here?
As a viewer, is there any importance for the viewer to know like what season you shot that in? Is that summer, or are the colors for summer or a winter scene, or are they all mixed up?
I hope not. Yeah, I hope it's not. No, they're all mixed up.
They're
Yeah.
all mixed up.
And the fall there comes very early, and you can actually find fallen leaves at almost at any time of the year. So no.
There's no direct sunlight in these, correct? Not that I can.
Correct. Well, I also use polarizer filter, but no, not direct sunlight. You're right. Yeah.
Is it polarizer to avoid any reflection from the surface?
To control a little bit, to allow some. I would never do complete completely, but because I wanted some surface and reflection to be there, but a little bit to reveal what's underneath a little bit more.
So you touched on earlier, I think a really important aspect of your work here, but also with other projects of yours, the sense of the physical body, namely like the skin, the sense of like the skin. And I feel like, I'm not sure if it's just a metaphor. I mean, obviously it is a metaphor that's interesting, but I wonder also, I think about the fact that you're in the creek and you're physically engaged and you have like this physical memory of being there, taking these photographs, and you're very connected to the creek, and there's a certain physical closeness and intimacy as part of your process. And you're thinking of the surface of the water being something of a skin of the human body. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Why the notion of the skin of the water, feeling like the skin of the body, feels important to you? And in connection with that, this notion of piercings.
Yeah.
How does that feel important to you?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I feel such affinity with water because of its sensitivity. And once I started kind of thinking about it more with this work, I came across this wonderful book called Sensitive Chaos by Theodore Schwenk, where he talks about the different qualities of water. And he talks, I'm so happy to find it because it's like finally somebody also had these ideas and kind of noticed how sensitive water is to any minimal disturbance, right? Be it surface, like is it something from underneath, or the twigs piercing, or the rain falling. So to me, and I personally have that extremely too sensitive. The skin is too sensitive, so any scarring becomes permanent on a human body sometimes. But water has this ability to like heal itself and very transient also, and kind of start over, right? And so the surface of the water is disturbed, and then like nothing happened. So to me, that was fascinating. But so I kind of made an analogy, like the twigs piercing. It's almost I feel it like the human skin being poked by something, right? And how it might feel, except for humans, the scarring remains, and for water it doesn't. So yeah, I just found it fascinating. And also the sensuality of water, how it feels on one's skin. But the metaphor could also go further, not just the surface, the skin, but what's underneath. Like what's the expression? The still waters run deep, right? So like trying to see through, but not being able to see completely what's going on with a particular, for example, in somebody's soul, or particular person. So I think all of that is the analogy.
Does this feel spiritual to you?
Very much so. Yeah, I hope that yours can feel too, but I think it's the most important element, part of the job. It's definitely not the technical side of it, but it's there.
So do you mind getting up and looking at some images?
Absolutely.
So I have a question. So speaking of like this tension, like the piercings,
Mhm.
which image might you go to where you feel the intensity of that like breaking of the surface or the piercing of the surface? Like which one do you feel that yourself most, or perhaps most?
Maybe this one. The branches felt quite sharp going in.
So this is number 14.
yeah.
Process it.
But also, I think, the piercing can also be illusionary, right, in this image, because sometimes you think something is pierced to the surface, but in reality, it's actually the shadow of something that is above. But it can also be like with this image, which is, you can see that my glasses.
Number 4.
That was actually one of the earlier images in the series, and that was taken during the rain, so there was a lot of movement on the surface, but these just felt, actually the analogy I had with this one, it wasn't a kind of a painful or violent interaction or piercing. It felt more like the old the vinyls the vinyl,
With a needle?
with the needle. Yeah, because it really felt like it was making music. It was just barely touching the water of the surface. So
Like the tip here
exactly
on the left.
exactly. Yeah, there were a couple.
And they were each like just barely touching the surface.
And depending on how high the water was, right, it was either touching or not touching. So yeah.
That's detailed.
And the one in the middle, so this one also was just a lot of interaction. I'm not saying that piercing is necessarily, talking about scarring. No, just any kind of interaction. I think this was more a playful interaction, like a dance.
No, but this one, and you all will be able to look at this more closely later, but like I'm really intrigued by this one. It does feel very singular to me. And one of the things, I mean, first of all, there's that leaf which is perfectly positioned to the right, and it has a really wonderful compositional balance to the ripple. The ripple, though, intrigues me. Like, do you happen to sort of just like touch the twig to create a ripple?
No.
Or like, what created that ripple in that moment? Because it's emanating from the twig in the water.
I think it's the quality of the water. I don't know if it has been a while since we had a lot of rain, but there was a season maybe 3-4 years ago when we did have a lot of water, and the creek became a river. It was quite turbulent. So the flow of water was just so strong that when it got to this obstacle, right, I think just physical qualities of the water, I don't know, change the surface. I'm not definitely not a physicist, but it was creating this, and that's why it felt like a dance. And whichever leaves were in that vortex, they have to move in a certain way. So I think I just captured it. There were a lot of attempts, but this one worked because we're just in the right position, but it was related to the movement here.
Was it rippling periodically? Do you remember?
It was rippling all the time with different intensity. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, lovely. And for the video, this is number 3 that we're So earlier you had talked about the importance of a kind of a merge, like where the reflection and like what you're seeing underneath are interacting and sort of merging, but then also there's that third layer of like the skin, the physical skin of the water, the surface tension of the water. In which piece or pieces do you feel like that happens most, like that combination or that merge?
Oh, the merge. Well, there are, I guess here, even though it's a very simple graphic, a simple image, but you have
Number
the
15.
leaf, you have the leaf underneath touching the surface of the water from below, tension surface, and you have a reflectance shadow of a branch. So, yeah. So,
Yeah, this is really lovely to look at later on closely. Like the way that the points of the leaf, it's actually very expressive. Like the way that the surface tension of the water buds
yeah.
and sort of curls around it, it really does feel very interactive with, you mentioned earlier, that connection or something is
Right.
happening. Something is happening.
Yeah, exactly.
And,
You can come up with your own story.
So I love that. Can we look at another one, which is a good example of this interaction between, levels, like we're talking about?
Well, it has a couple. So this is on the surface. Part of the,
Number 7.
and this is under the surface. So part of the, I don't know, trunk of the fallen tree is above, and this is below the surface. This has all kinds of things in it. Underneath, below, reflectance. The leaf is underneath. The dark parts are the shadows, and the branches are.
Yeah, this is number 13. Just like personal response to this one. Actually, I didn't look at this one nearly as much as several others here. So I feel like I'm looking at it more closely now. Something that I really appreciate about this, looking at it in a moment, is you have that merge, right? And the underneath, you have the reflection of the surface of the water. But when you look at it, it really just feels like almost like with the highlight here, it almost like feels like it's sky. And it's like it almost feels like it's like a vertical, like there's the ground below, there's the sky above, and just simply seeing twigs growing up towards or branches of twigs and growing up
And
towards
the
the sky.
funny part about
It's an
this,
illusion.
it was actually, yeah, there is a lot of that. But the funny thing about this image, it was shot horizontally, and for the longest time, I couldn't see it in any other way but horizontally. But I think it works, it does work better.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it has that ground
Yeah.
sky.
Ground sky, and there's another one here with the ground sky. This one. For this one, I didn't need to be oriented.
What mood or what feelings, like if you think about, words for emotions or words for moods, what do you hope that your viewers experience?
As long as they feel something. No, but true. I think it's different for everybody, different, and maybe depends on your mood, right? We have 10 minutes. I think they were emotional to me. It was an emotional experience when I captured these. So I'm hoping that something is there for people to experience. Going back to the childhood experiences, being able to share. Still there.
Well, they touch me emotionally.
And I would like to change my opening remarks where I compared your work to Impressionism. I think minimalism is a better part of the art movement that more closely relates to your work.
Although Impressionism was probably a little bit more emotional.
But there is this spareness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Camping is a spareness of subject that's here.
Of the three photographs that have the ripple effects that are together in that series, the one on the upper left is the simplest one in my opinion, and to me that's my favorite.
We haven't touched on the circles. Talk about it, but that's quite an important element that seems to be repeating to me from one body of work to another. So I was found it amusing that they appeared in this body of work, but I found the surface of the water as well.
Well, I think we should get to it. Let's begin.
Yeah,
We have enough. We have enough time. I heard it was 2 minutes, not
10 minutes. Oh, it was 2 minutes?
2 or
Yes.
10.
It was a 10-minute mark. You got about 10 minutes for questions.
Okay.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
fine.
heading towards the Q&A. Well, so I think it's a wonderful last piece. But sometimes you just mentioned right here. Circles have appeared in earlier projects. And they're definitely here with the ripples. What is it about circles for you?
I thought about it more when I was thinking about the whole talk, and I think there are a couple of levels. My previous body of work, which was called Inner Circle, I think it was touching on the spiritual side because there was a strong connection with Enzo, Circle, strong Zen Buddhism, just in general how loaded that it's loaded with symbolism, right? The circle of life, the wholeness. So I think there is a spiritual connection with circles that I feel, but there is also a perceptual connection because I like spherical objects, and I think it's because they feel safe. They don't have any sharp angles. They invite touch. I think that's one of the reasons I also got into ceramics and making pitch pots because they're just so nice to touch. So I think, yeah, definitely there is something more related to a body and perception. But then there is a spiritual side. I guess wholeness would be what attracts me about the circle. It's complete. It's not missing any parts.
So we've had a decent amount of Q&A along the way. So there was like one last question that we touched on earlier today. Like this notion of how I think for a lot of us these days, right, with water and with our mega drought that we're all experiencing, I think it's easy for a lot of your viewers to just naturally have some thoughts about water in this current moment, environmentally, politically. With those sort of thoughts in the air, in our current day, how do you think that the experience of this work maybe is influenced by those thoughts that sort of just like being there? how might it color or affect people's feelings, having those thoughts in the background?
Yeah, hopefully, maybe just to experience the preciousness of water, but also just freedom of anxiety maybe in a way as well, because when I start thinking about drought and also shortage of water, it fills me with anxiety, and this is the experience which is the opposite. I want it to be meditative and appreciative and become kind of for people to be in the moment and just appreciate the beauty of the water, really.
I missed, I mean, it really.
You meant water.
These images, I missed water.
Yeah, I know. I miss rain.
Yeah, well, they are, the word sanctuary, or refuge, comes to my mind, and it really feels something about a refuge. And I'm thinking about you also like being there, and
Yeah.
I'm thinking a lot about that.
Yeah.
Your physical
Yeah.
connection, your physical time, the standard time. You and your gators,
Yeah.
being like really
A
close
lot
to
of
the water,
preparation.
and
Yeah.
having that physical closeness.
The circumstances happened that I was very often there on Sunday mornings, and I never went to church, but it felt like I'm going to church. That was because it also has a canopy of trees, right? So you feel you're outside, but outdoors, but you feel like you're in an enclosed, very safe space. So even though I mentioned that it was like going there by myself, but there is a certain feeling of safety there because you are just so surrounded by these wonderful trees. So I used to say that that's my church on Sunday mornings.
Well, that's a really, I think, lovely sort of last-ish comment, and maybe that's a good segue towards Q&A. Any other questions arising for you? Anything you're curious about?
Repeat about circles. That brings in a certain universal. Depths. Many layers to that. So, put it in this and know that that did not exist. The rest of it stayed. And when sort of ties into extrapolating many different meanings out of that, such as but you're part of it, you're a witness to it. All that sort of
And also, I was thinking about we're striving for perfection, right? And there is such thing as perfect circle, but I'm also attracted to, in my previous body of work particularly, was the imperfections, like the different, slightly kind of changed and transformed and deformed circle too, because it's even closer to nature, because most of the time you don't necessarily see perfect circles unless it's the droplet falling in the water. So all variations of it, but I think probably that also wabi-sabi, the imperfection that is closer to nature. So the attraction, it goes beyond the perfect circle.
And this also has me thinking, just for myself, when I look at this image, I think it's interesting for some photographs, how you can feel almost like you can hear something. And I'm like, this whole conversation, I feel like I'm hearing something like that, the babbling, the murmuring of a tree.
Yeah, it's
Do you feel that yourself at all? Like is there like an auditory element?
a little bit. I think it's hard for me to separate because I went through the experience of being there. But one thing about the sound, I disliked it there when it was very windy. I think it was the discomfort of not, because I'm so immersed in that experience, right? And if I cannot hear what's happening next to me, it feels a little less safe. And with the sound of wind, plus the trees could be falling, the branches could be falling, right? So my favorite was when I could only hear the water and see the birds as well.
What are you working on now?
Now, well, I got into actually that also has to do with water. I got into botanical printing, which is printing with leaves and flowers. And I'm using a different type of Japanese paper to print. So it's kind of a longer conversation, but I make those prints on Japanese papers, different kinds. Gampi is one of my favorites, also is also one of them. And but I use paper towels as an aid in that process of eco-printing. And the paper towels make beautiful imagery. But I don't want to necessarily display the paper towels, so I'm photographing those images and printing them on Gampi paper, which has a certain sheen like silk. So I think that's going to be the next body of work.
For clarity, could you say like what you mean by printing with leaves? What exactly do you mean by that?
So it's a process in which you prepare paper in a certain way and then you lay out leaves on the surface and you wrap it around.
And
and
they're
you
wet.
steam. They're wet, yeah. Well, you wet the paper. You can also wet the material. And you either steam it or boil it. And then once you unfold it, the leaves, the plant material gives you the pigment and it gives you the shapes and forms. So there are actually similarities in how it looks, as far as not everything is pronounced, and not everything is sharp.
So
yeah.
the plant material is bleeding pigment into the paper towel.
You help it bleed, and some plants bleed better than other plants. But yeah, they give the pigment.
Is your photography outdoors though? Are you doing the photographs like in the creek, you were outdoors
Yeah.
experiencing it?
No, this is indoors. Because particularly if I photograph paper towels, they change so quickly. They dry and you lose certain colors. So I literally just hold it to light and shoot with my iPhone. But I've been shooting, the last few bodies of work have been with an iPhone. I have no problems with that. You're going to say something?
No.
We're good?
I think we're good.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Very well. Yeah.
Now is the time for everybody to be able to get up and go through the print section.
Yeah, please, they take close. On the internet.